welcome to episode 87 of the CRICKETher Weekly. Now, as with the last few episodes, we're going to start with a bit of a roundup about what's been happening in WBBL. Over to you, Sid. Who's in, who's out? Sorry about the Hurricanes.
Yeah, unfortunately for Hurricanes fans, among which I count myself, they were the first team to kind of go out, as it were, so they can no longer qualify for this elaborate sort of semi-final stage where third play fourth, and then the winner of third play fourth plays second, and the winner of that plays first.
And you don't think that that's too complicated?
No, it's a great system. It's not too complicated at all. So the Hurricanes are out. So we know for certain that the Renegades, who are currently in first place, will at least make the top four, and ditto the Heat after today's results. So Renegades and Heat definitely make the top four, but there's obviously still quite a lot to play for because there's a huge advantage now to coming first that you get to go straight through to the final. And yeah, everyone else can still kind of make it in theory, but particularly dicey for the Sixers. The Sixers are all but out. Of the few million chances there are left, sort of permutations of the table, Sixers qualify, and only a tiny handful, and an awful lot of other results to go their way.
And that's a bit of a surprise because the Sixers have traditionally been quite a successful team in WBBL. What's gone wrong for them this season?
Yeah, they've won it twice in the past, haven't they? They haven't won it the last couple of seasons. And, I think that, okay, if you want to look at what's wrong for the Sixers, I think you have to kind of start in an unfair place. And you have to really start with Elise Perry, I think. Now, that's in some ways unfair. So if you look at the total number of runs, the top run scorers in WBBL, the total number of runs scored by each player, Elise Perry's right up there. She's the fifth highest run scorer this season. So how on earth is it her fault? Well, the problem with Elise Perry, and this is something that's been consistent throughout her career, is that she's quite a slow starter. So she typically takes sort of 40, 45 balls of an innings before she hits her stride and gets a strike rate over 100. And she hasn't quite got there. So although she's scored enough runs, over 300 runs, it takes her to fifth on the list. She's one of only two women in the top 20 run scorers that scored at less than 100. Okay. So she hasn't got that strike rate over 100. And the other person on the list that hasn't got a strike rate over 100 of the top run scorers is Nicole Bolton, another Sixers player. And the problem isn't with what Elise Perry's doing. The problem is that that other people aren't getting the kind of explosive quick runs.
They're not making up for it.
Yeah. So, Shafali hasn't really clicked for them in her first season at the WBBL. Alyssa Healy hasn't had a great season by her standards. One very big innings, but then a lot of not very big innings. And Ash Gardner has not had a great season either. So, it's been a tough one for the Sixers. But, there's other teams like the Renegades, have had an opportunity to shine. So, one team's down is another team's up.
Is there a little bit of us that is possibly quite pleased that Alyssa Healy and Ash Gardner aren't in very good nick going into the Ashes in January?
No, because they're sure to be back. They're far too good.
Damn it.
If they're going to have a bad patch, they're having their bad patch now. That's probably terrible news for England, Raph.
Oh, no. Okay. They're
going to score hundreds of runs in the Ashes between them.
I was trying to put a positive spin on it. Okay. Well,
it's a positive spin if you're Australian.
We'll revisit this when Alyssa Healy scores a test
Indeed.
double 100 and wins the Ashes for Australia. Okay, and moving on to our next topic of the week. Not this past week, but the week before that, we published a piece on the site that was kind of about a possible future envisaged for county cricket. And there's a bit of uncertainty around women's county cricket at the moment, isn't there, Sid? Because what happened was in 2019, when the ECB said this is going to be the last edition of the Women's County Championship, so they're not going to play any more 50-over county cricket. At the same time, they said what we're going to do is give the T20 Cup, so the Women's County T20 competition, a stay of execution. I don't think that they called it that, but that's what we called it. A stay of execution for 2 seasons. So we'll play it in 2020 and we'll play it in 2021 and then we'll reassess at that point. Now, we are at that point. Obviously, in 2019, nobody envisaged a global pandemic and nobody thought that, therefore, that would effectively knock out all women's county cricket for the 2020 season. Which it did, but we did have the official ECB sponsored T20 competition earlier in 2021, although it was a bit of a mishmash and slightly different to how it's looked in previous seasons. Anyway, we're at that point where the ECB said that they would kind of reassess things, and we haven't heard anything official, so it still seems to be a little bit up in the air, doesn't it? What do you make of all this, Sid?
Well, I think the biggest thing that piece on our website showed, and that piece wasn't written by either of us, by the way. It was written by another contributor who wanted to remain anonymous, but obviously somebody that has a keen interest in cricket and in the domestic women's game. And what it showed is like the enormous goodwill and enthusiasm. There was almost a groundswell for this for county cricket, and I just think that the ECB should be harnessing. They should look at the response to things like that and go, look, we've actually got something here that people love. People in general, a lot of cricket fans are not very happy with us at the moment. We might have a lot of new fans from the 100, which we're actually going to come on to in a minute, but these old traditional people that have been kind of holding cricket up for the past X years. They love this stuff, and let's just do something for them. Let's give something back to them. County cricket is what they want, and I know that it's people at the ECB have made commitments in the other direction. They've gone, oh, we think that club cricket provides a better long-term path, but we are where we are, guys. And I just think that it might be better for all concerned if the ECB accept that and harness that goodwill and that positivity about county cricket. What do you think, Raf?
Yeah, well, I was just going to read out a couple of the comments that we had on Twitter after that piece was published. So Jason Rance from Bucks Cricket says, there has to be something in place for women's cricket. We have so many talented young women in Bucks who at 19 go off to university/work and are desperate for representative best v best cricket in the summer. So that's obviously speaking to the part of the piece that was basically saying that if you don't make it into a regional setup, then it's almost like you feel that you've been discarded. So of course we need to keep representative county cricket for those players, otherwise they're just going to fall out of the system. We don't have a big enough player pool really for that to be an option. We need to keep giving people opportunities to feel that they are representing a team that they feel attached to. And they won't just go off and play club cricket. So that was one comment. Melissa Story, who I think is a Hursley Park player. I
think she's their captain.
Okay, with Charlotte Taylor and Emily Windsor.
And interestingly, I believe I hope I'm not insulting her. I believe a player that's never quite made it at county. So she never played county cricket, only played club cricket, I believe.
Okay, but she's also a commentator now on the BBC, I was going to say. And she says, this is something I feel very strongly about, and this piece perfectly sums up my experience of the women's domestic system. I always used to get upset talking about it because I was disappointed that I wasn't good enough and felt there was no way back into the system. With female drop-off in sport prominent around the ages of 18 to 22, more needs to be done to address these problems and keep young women playing cricket. And then there was another one from Rich Hudson from Bucks saying that he agreed with the piece 100% and that Bucks are going to retain a full women's county programme to be the pinnacle of their recreational game, just as the national county team is for men. He says, we've come too far and are developing too many good players and coaches to drop the ball now. And I think those comments are really powerful, and they do speak to what you have just said, that there is this enormous enthusiasm and support for women's county cricket, and it feels like, we've said this before in this forum, that the ECB felt that they could get rid of women's county cricket without very much comeback and just replace it with the regional setup, and actually they totally underestimated the amount of popular support and the amount of kind of attachment to playing for your county. So I think that it would be disappointing if it doesn't continue. I think that it would be really a backward step for the ECB if that partly they are being measured by Sport England, aren't they, on their metrics in terms of participation, and one of those metrics will be women's participation. So if you end up knocking out a whole load of players by getting rid of county cricket, then that's surely a negative thing. They've talked about trying to support club cricket more, but it's still, I just think that we've not seen a huge amount of evidence that there's suddenly this amazing new club system whereby in any area of England you can suddenly access a brilliant club setup. It's always been patchy geographically, and I haven't seen anything to suggest that that's changed in the last couple of years, despite the ECB's best intentions. I think the only thing that will be holding the ECB back from saying, okay, well, let's carry on with county cricket is almost the kind of embarrassment. There's a sort of political embarrassment around it, because it would be making a U-turn, and it is an admission that, okay, sorry folks, we got this one wrong. But that's a terrible reason to make a policy decision.
Yeah, it's very sunk cost fallacy, isn't it?
Yeah. So for me, county cricket should absolutely continue, but the big question is, actually, how do we see that place for county cricket in the system? Will the England players, for example, ever play county cricket again? They weren't able to play in 2021 because of COVID regulations. It was felt to be too risky, which I still think is a bit strange, because all of the regional players were also playing county and then going off and mixing with the England players in warm-up matches, and it was a bit strange. But anyway, that was the decision that was made. And obviously nobody played, or only a very few. The London Championship was played in 2020, wasn't it? But other than that, there wasn't really any county cricket, so no England players played then. So they haven't played any for 2 years. It's going to be a very difficult scenario to see them playing any in 2022, purely because we've got an extra tournament happening, the Commonwealth Games. When are the England players going to get a rest? When are they going to fit in playing any county cricket? Once they've gone for 3 years without playing county cricket, that seems to me that you've set perhaps an unfortunate precedent. What do you think?
I'm okay with the England players not playing county cricket, because I almost see county cricket slightly differently. I see it as, representing, the kind of the wider diaspora, like the pinnacle of the amateur game, if you like, and the people that are in a position to get into and break into the professional game. So if the England players don't play it, I don't think that's a disaster, as long as you kind of give it the proper support that it needs to be the kind of the pinnacle of the amateur domestic game, and to do the job that in men's cricket, Premier League club cricket does. And that's a point. I was talking to someone this morning about this. That you don't have to. It's not the law that the men's game and the women's game have to operate in exactly the same way. And you could envisage a future for women's county cricket where it's the kind of the sort of the recreational pinnacle, the sort of the amateur semi-professional elite. So that's where that could be. Okay, well, moving on to our next topic, football. Well, yep. So in the Daily Telegraph this week, Tom Garry and Molly McElwee published a really great piece, which we recommend going off and reading, about superficially it was about women's football and about the fact that they're seeing some falling attendances for women's football in terms of the attendances at grounds. So they're going down slightly. It
was about the Women's Super League, wasn't it?
Yeah, so the number of people actually going to games is falling. What they're doing is they're looking at cricket, therefore, and they're going, well, cricket's been very successful with the 100. We've seen a massive rise in people going to grounds and watching women's sport there. What can women's football learn from women's cricket? What can they learn, Raf?
Well, first of all, I think that one of the reasons why this is a really interesting piece is because it's flipping the dynamic that we've traditionally had for the last few years, which has very much been, what can women's cricket learn from women's football? Because women's football in this country has always been seen as the biggest women's sport, the biggest growing women's sport, and the most successful women's sport, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And so this is kind of turning that on its head and going, well, actually, women's football, we're a little bit disappointed with the crowd figures, and if we compare that to the fact that they were getting an average of 7,500 people to every 100 match, then that's a bit disappointing. And
just to put that in actual perspective, what we're talking about is that for the Women's Super League this year, average crowds have been about 2,000 per game. So that's actually substantially less, albeit in smaller stadiums. But yeah. Sorry, Raf.
No, it's a really good point. So actually, the 100 was kind of, I think I actually wrote this in my piece for The Guardian about the double headers, that it was almost like women's cricket was kind of eclipsing women's football and eclipsing where women's football had got to, because previously we'd only seen those sort of level crowds for kind of World Cup matches, and actually so it was exciting to get those for a domestic competition. But I think that it's a little bit simplistic to just go, okay, well, look what women's cricket did with the 100. That's really brilliant, and we need to learn from that. One of the disappointing things actually was that crowd bounce that we had in the 100 wasn't then translated into increased performances for any of the women's matches that happened in September in this country. So, for example, there weren't more people coming to domestic matches, to the Rachel Hayhoe Flint or to the Charlotte Edwards Cup matches.
Yeah, there was a couple of hundred people at the RHF final, I think, but certainly not a huge crowd.
That's a lot less than we used to get at the Kia Super League final, isn't it?
Yep.
So that was, was slightly disappointing. The other thing is even the England v New Zealand internationals that were happening in September were getting quite poor crowds compared to what we've seen in some years. I know that people talked about there being a kind of COVID factor at Chelmsford, but normally you'd see a really kind of rollicking sellout crowd at Chelmsford, and yes, they said, oh, it's a sellout, but it really didn't feel particularly full or busy, and
it didn't feel rollicking. I mean, that's the really important thing there. That atmosphere that we've traditionally associated with Chelmsford, of it bouncing and sort of screaming crowd, and that wasn't there this time.
Yeah, and so I think that actually, what the ECB will be really struggling with at the moment and trying to work out what the answer is how do they get those. How do they translate those bigger crowds for the women's 100 into bigger crowds for other women's matches? Otherwise, I think I've even said exactly this before on the CRICKETher Weekly, that otherwise you just end up with this 4-week-long festival of cricket every summer that you get lots of people along to, but they don't then go and interact with cricket in other ways, in other guises, in that way, is it really a step forward? So I don't know that that's
the 100 has to be the gateway drug.
Yeah, I don't know that that's what women's football should be aiming for.
Yeah, and women's football crowds are definitely very different. Women's football definitely needs the crowds, the kind of people that come along every single week. They almost need those season ticket holders, and I don't think we had season tickets at all for the 100, did we? There wasn't a thing you could buy. I know you can buy season tickets for the men's Big Bash. I don't know whether the women's Big Bash also has season tickets in a normal year. Obviously, this year is very different because of the fact they've been played as a sort of circus. But yeah, so I think they're different kinds of crowds as well. But there's definitely some interesting stuff to look at. And there's going to be some interesting research done on the way that crowds have interacted with the 100. So
yeah, I think and one of the things that we have to guard against perhaps is sort of thinking that it's inevitable that crowds at women's sport are just kind of going to exponentially go like this unproblematically. Obviously, one of the things with the Women's Super League is that it's now on the BBC. So it's on free-to-air television, so you don't have to get any Sky subscription to be able to watch it. So, and that's really great. That's fantastic, and that's what we've been saying for years that women's cricket needs, is that more of exposure on free-to-air TV. But if people can watch it from their sofa, then you're going to get kind of increased TV audiences, hopefully, but not necessarily increased crowd attendances. And also we have to kind of guard against like a short-term view as well. The 100's been really exciting, but kind of what matters partly, as well as it translating into bigger audiences for other cricket competitions. But how many people are we going to get in next year's 100? And in 5 years' time, are we still going to be getting 15,000 people at Lord's to watch a women's 100 match? Or is it something about the novelty and the fact that it's the first time? So I think that we just have to be a little bit careful about kind of going, oh, well, inevitably things will just get better.
Yeah, it was interesting that the way the 100 was marketed. The 100 was very much marketed as come and watch some good cricket. Whereas football, for 100 and something years has always been come and watch your team. Come and support your team, whether they win or whether they lose. Because, of course, ultimately, over the longer term, your team is going to, your A team is going to lose half the time. So, you need to encourage fans to be able to come and support a team even if they're losing. Even if they're losing, and let's face it, if they're losing, it feels like you're not watching good cricket.
And that's actually a little bit problematic for cricket because now, we've talked about this before, there are so many different teams to support in the women's game. So I know you to some extent feel that the Southern Brave are the Southern Vipers in a different guise, but it doesn't quite match up that easily between the teams. So if what you're trying to do is inspire fan loyalty, then people are going to be really excited to follow the Trent Rockets for 4 weeks a year, and then they can't follow them any of the rest of the time. So that is actually quite difficult for cricket, isn't it?
Yeah, and I've said before that I think that they should have had consistent teams across the whole of the domestic women's game. But that's not a direction they've gone in, so, we are where we are.
Yeah.
Anyway, and finally this week, the ICC have announced the latest inductees into their Hall of Fame, including Jan Britton, a former England player, who sadly is no longer with us, so can't be there to kind of enjoy her sort of posthumous success. I just want to read you something that was written this week about Jan Britton. It says, I idolised you, if I'm honest. This is effectively to her. I watched you play in the World Cup in England, and I can't forget my first ever game going to watch England was in Finch-Hampstead, when my dad took me to watch you play. That's the first time I saw you live. I was a bit of a geek growing up, and I'd heard so much about you, so I always knew that Jan Britton was the best England batter of her generation. And since that day I first watched you score runs, I was just in awe of you. Now that was written by Charlotte Edwards. And I think that's interesting, firstly, because so many players of Charlotte Edwards' generation, if you ask them who their idol was, they would say, a men's player. So, they might say, Sachin Tendulkar, or I'm not sure I know any other men's players, but think of an insert favoured men's player here. Whereas, Charlotte Edwards, obviously, her late father was very much responsible for that. Was saying that's a substantial. Finch-Hampstead is just down the road from here. It's just about 3 miles in that direction. Sid points over his shoulder for the benefit of those that are listening on the podcast.
Through the green
curtain. That sounds weird, Raf. It's through the green curtain. But that's a long drive from where they lived up in Huntingdonshire. So her father, taking her to see that game was really important. And she's maintained that kind of emotional attachment very much to the women's game. She's very much a women's cricket person, isn't she? Anyway, I digressed from talking about Lottie because we should of course be focusing on Jan. Raf, a couple of years ago, Surrey gave Jan Britton the honour of naming a room in the pavilion after her, and you actually wrote a piece about that. So you talk to us. Tell us about Jan Britton and what her importance was.
Well, it was an amazing event at Surrey, and one of the things that was really clear was how important Jan Britton had been to an entire generation, or even multiple generations of female cricketers, as the quote that you've just read out from Charlotte Edwards kind of encapsulates. I mean, just a few kind of numbers about her, because I think that some of the stats are very important, just to show what a legendary batter she was. She's the leading Test run scorer of all time, and with 1,935 Test runs. She averaged 57 against Australia, which is quite staggering when you think about where women's cricket was. She was an amateur for the whole of her playing career. She represented England between 1979 and 1998. So she was just such a brilliant player.
That was an era in which Australia were very dominant as well, wasn't it, Raf?
Although England won the World Cup memorably in 1993 at home, and Jan Britton was a vital part of that side. Obviously the England-Australia rivalry was very much alive, and so to average 57 at that time against Australia was no mean feat. She was also a brilliant fielder. I don't have the stats in front of me, but all of the stories you hear about her taking these incredible diving catches in the field, again at a time when really that wasn't something that we saw very much in women's cricket. And there's people said that one of the reasons why the England women's team changed from playing in skirts to playing in trousers was because Jan Britton was doing all these very athletic dives, and they just thought that it wasn't very good for her to keep ending up with gashes all over her legs from diving in the field. So she was kind of sort of instrumental in that change as well. But it was a really lovely event, and I remember, so Barbara Daniels, who played with her for England, talked about Jan as being hero worshipped by everyone because she was just so brilliant, but a very kind of lovely, self-effacing person as well. She's said to have been quite modest, and she'd probably be, if she was still with us, and it's really sad that she can't be with us to sort of accept the award, to accept the institution into the Hall of Fame, but she'd actually probably be quite embarrassed by it all because to top off being so brilliant, she was also very lovely and self-effacing. And Ebony Rainford-Brent was there as well at this event, and she talked about kind of growing up and all of the coaches saying to her, oh, if only you could bat like Jan Britton, why aren't you playing that shot more like Jan would? and Ebony just knowing that she would never ever kind of meet that standard because this was just such a fantastic player. A really brilliant kind of servant of English cricket, and it's great that she is being recognised by the ICC.
Okay. Well, that's all we've got time for this week. So thank you very much for listening. We'll be back here next week, same time, same place. Until then, goodbye.